Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Robinson, or the Play Typer guy, as my son calls me. And I am delighted today to have with me Leslie Gray Streeter, a columnist for the Baltimore Banner, whose work has appeared in Miami Herald, many great places. Also, the author of Black Widow, which I'd like to discuss a little bit later. But right now, Leslie, you and I know Roxane Gay as well have written some great pieces about sort of the Chris Rock, Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith situation,
Absolutely.
and specifically in response to the literally year in the making response
Mhm.
to the slap. And I think you and I have both had the sense of if we got slapped, our immediate response would be we're upset and we're angry or right back.
Mhm.
But a
Mhm.
year later, maybe we would have more to say than perhaps what Chris Rock said in Selective Outrage, his special that's airing on Netflix. Edit it so that the jokes make sense, I think, now. His original live version had some flubs. But
Me too.
yeah, Leslie, can you just sort of walk us through what your thoughts were when you were watching that special and trying to kind of piece it all together?
Well, let me ask you, where were you raised? Like, what city were you raised in?
Greenville, South Carolina.
Okay, so I was raised in Baltimore, where I live now. So, imagine anywhere that you're from, Greenville, Baltimore, whatever. There's a playground, and there's like a kid who's all mouth because he's a buck oh four, and he's the guy that the bigger kids pick on. So he's learned to be slick with his mouth, and sometimes he uses it to get himself out of trouble, and sometimes he uses it to deal with trouble directly or to start trouble, depending on the day. And without my psychology degree that I don't have, I believe that that is Chris Rock, and I think that Chris Rock, and he makes a joke of it in Selective Outrage about how he, you know, is a small guy and he is not Will Smith. He has not played Ali. He is not a person that is of big size. And I think that a lot of his MO has been the little skinny guy with the big old mouth who runs his mouth. And if he's running his mouth and he's on your side, it's great. If he's not on your side, it's a problem. And so I think a guy like that, if you, for whatever reason, you cross that guy, they're coming for you, but they're not going to hit you. They're waiting. It was like revenge is a dish best served cold. He had an entire year to dice that thing and slice that thing and stir the pot literally and figuratively, and just to get it. No, I don't think, as you said during the live presentation, that it was particularly successful, but he knew what he was doing. So there's no argument that this was a planned attack. And I'm not saying he was wrong to do it because he got slapped in the face, right? He got on the biggest stage in Hollywood. Dude, whether he deserved it, Hollow slapped him in the face. He was a victim of an assault on worldwide television, and it was wild, and I've never seen anything like it. However, from that moment on, the way that once he had a time to be out of the moment, the way he then decided to deal with that, and then for a year just stewing in it and stewing on it and sitting on it and getting it all right, that's how he responded to it. So I think I it's bizarre to me, sort of the criticism that critics of this moment, including myself, have gotten, because it's like he put it out there. There's no way to really misinterpret or understand what he was saying, because he said what he said, and he's very much a I said what I said person. So the fact that those of us who were not thrilled with it are being told that we're not trying to be deep enough, we're not understanding, or not getting where he's coming from, is so weird to me. Sometimes people just don't like things.
um, and to sort of, I will compare him to one of his idols and one of mine, Richard Pryor. I know there was the famous sort of New Year's Eve routine about when Richard Pryor was leaving his wife was leaving him, and
Mhm.
he shot the car, and he says it was a
Yes.
wonderful routine. It's obviously self-serving because his
Yes.
wife had every reason to leave him, but clearly the subject for ridicule is himself. He's
Yes.
calling us to laugh at his ridiculousness. It's like, well, you're not leaving, so we're not kind of rude. Oh yeah, yeah, you shot this woman's tires out, so she literally can't leave you. Oh my god, it's more of just how stupid I am in this
Mm.
moment. And I feel like Rock has always sort of lacked that vulnerability. I mean, get to vulnerability later and his sort of inability to kind of cope with that, to where it seemed after a year, there's no mention of like why
No.
why did I choose at the Oscars to mock a woman's medical condition publicly? And even if I hadn't been slapped, that wouldn't have been cool. So like the
No.
best case scenario would have been I would have insulted her on live television. And I know you and others have noticed this. His big sort of comeback line is that, well, mic drop moment is that, oh, I was taught never to fight in front of white people. But I would imagine, how I was raised, or I think a lot of Black people were raised, would be to not ridicule or
No.
insult a Black woman
Mm-mm.
in such a personal manner. I mean, you've probably as well. There's tons of things written about Black women and their hair and
Mm-hmm.
sensitivities around this, and to mock her in front of an audience of mostly white people is
Mm-mm.
also not cool. But I think he was never. He was. There's been that thread, right, of refusing to see this sort of quote unquote violence in words. Obviously, it's not literal violence, but the hurt you can cause other people.
Well, here's the thing. I think that people are already mad at me. I've been called a bad Black person. I've been called not supportive of Black men. I've been told that I'm obviously a bad mother because how could I be a mother and support? I mean, just all kinds of bullshit. Pardon me. Shouldn't have said that word. What I'm saying is that we are in this moment where people will move the goalpost back and forth so much that they're dizzy. They must be dizzy to have to explain things away. Like that he he never said in his special what he had said about her. If you had not
Hmm.
seen the Oscars, you would assume that his joke at the Oscars had been about her relationship with Will Smith.
Oh yeah,
Because
absolutely.
for him to keep it, he decided, how do I, and it was like a legal defense. It was like silly, but it was like he stuck on a thing and he got on a thing and he stuck to it. That Jada is mad because she's humiliated her husband with her entanglements and her relationship with this young person and her openness about it and her refusal to shut up about it. So that's why she's mad and that's why he's mad and that's why he hit me and it's all her fault. And it goes back to her being ineffectual with trying to get me to quit my job at the Oscars when her man didn't get nominated for concussion. That was a joke that he flubbed. One of the jokes that he flubbed in the live bit. He meant to say concussion, but he said emancipation. So to follow that argument and have that be case closed, everything has to be about just Jada Pinkett Smith's identification as a person who is only about herself and only about her self-interest and not as she purported Oscar so white and standing for diversity, but also it has to only be about that. If you had not watched the Oscars, you would assume that he had never made a joke about her hair. You would imagine that he had never had a history since 1997 of making fun of her, that there was an appearance on his show in the late 90s on HBO where he was not kind to her. I mean, there were rumors that there are things with three of them that go even deeper. I don't know that. I'm not going to speak on it. But if you watch that special, you would say this is clearly just a crazy person, this woman who nudged her husband on and nudged him and nudged him and look at her, look at her. I mean, I've had people who've insisted to me that she's basically a witch, who are like, look at her, look at him. And she's looking at him and she gave him a look. You give your partner a look too if somebody was making fun of you. To your face. He was, as we say in the community, literally playing in her face,
Hmm.
daring her to do something about it. I mean, I don't think he thought anyone was going to say something like, actually go up and hit him, but that was a moment because of the history. So in his special, when he says, she did this thing with Oscar so white, she tried to get me to quit the job. I ended, it's her fault. That's 6 years ago. You know,
Hmm.
I was 6 years ago in 2022. So are you saying that nothing has transpired, that it was obviously very ugly and very personal? And he claims, oh, I called Will after this August Alsina, that's the name of the young man that she'd had the entanglement with, that this young man had, she'd admitted, they both admitted they'd had a relationship. And I tried to call Will and he wouldn't answer the phone. No, everyone was laughing at him. Everyone was calling him a B word. And it was so terrible. Once again, everything on him, the onus on him. And once again, he has taken a year to crap that narrative. And there are people that hate women or don't like Jada Pinkett Smith or hate black women or just feel like being contrary that day because it's a day that ends in Y. And that is what they're going to do. And you can decide to feel however you want, but I have so many people who have this weird logic and they're arguing with me about it. And I go, but okay, say she's crazy. All right, how is that okay to call her a bitch on nationwide television?
Or the N word. In 40 years, as I've written, 40 years that the Richard Pryor sort of put it to bed definitively of not using that word. He insists upon it with no sense of it's obviously a slur. When he was
Yes.
using it, it's obviously a slur. Like like there's no whitewashing it, in other
No,
words. And
there's no nuance or love in the way that he said it. There was no it's like, if you've seen Marlon Wayans special on the same subject, God Loves Me.
yeah.
Okay. He said some terrible things too, but it was the opposite of what Chris Rock said, because he talked about each of those people's humanity. He talked about personal relationships that he had, that he and Jada were once very close friends, that Chris Rock, that he says they have sort of an adversarial, kind of begrudgingly loving stepbrother thing, and that Will Smith was like his idol. So these are people that he knows well, and he can extrapolate meaning onto everything they've done because he knows them. Some in the group well than others, but every bit of vulnerability that Chris Rock lacked, Marlon Wayans had.
Oh yeah.
When he talked about he was really in love with Jada, he thought, and she was not in love with him. She was not interested. It was not that at all. That he emulated Will Smith because Will Smith was everything he wasn't. That Chris Rock was more successful. That Chris Rock had an ease and a sharpness to the point where he didn't even want to do. He clowned him so badly. Chris Rock clowned him so much at the Comedy Store or Laugh Factory, whatever it was, that he didn't even do stand up for 20 years. And so he admitted his vulnerability. He admitted, yeah, he said some pretty misogynistic things, but the way that he said that, the N word, it was the way that it's used. I don't like that word, but he used it in a way that was cordial, that was familial, that was, this is all us, we're all boys, we're all people, we're all black, we're all doing our thing. And that is not the way that Chris Rock used it. And so it's just like
No.
the difference between calling a woman, again, the words, not that I've not used that word, but like among your friends when you go B word, blah, 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 that is different than somebody who literally hates you calling you that word. That blank started it. There's no love in that. There's no nuance in that. Everything about that is violence. And when he had that weird line in the beginning about anyone who says words hurt never been hit in the face, yeah, they both do. It's like, and yes,
Well,
and
yeah.
yes,
I
yes,
mean, that was sort of the big part of this discussion when it occurred at the time, was it had to be that, you know, Chris Rock should be able to say whatever he wants and you take it because violence is unacceptable, words have no meaning. And I don't think we necessarily believe that. I
no,
think what he said was terrible. It does not justify slapping
no,
him. But
no,
at the same time, if this was you and me, uh, this is a big night for you. You and I are married. This is a big night for me.
absolutely, absolutely,
And someone is crapping on that night
yes,
is an awful thing to do. Like, I would feel bad as a person. Who knows? Maybe I got caught up in a moment and I say, hey, let me make this joke or whatever, which would be me. Not that I'm trying to like say I'm some wonderful moral person, but yeah, I make jokes for a living. Who knows? Maybe I would go Don Rickles for a moment. Granted, he
yes,
has his history with her. Who knows? I do that. Oh, I hurt someone's feelings. I should feel bad. And it's always been tough for me as someone who likes comedy, who writes in comedy,
mm-hmm.
where a part of something I consider an art form or that I do is often sort of treated as, oh, it's an excuse to be cruel.
Yes,
Like, well,
absolutely,
that's not when you turn people towards one person and make them all laugh. It's sort of the like the scene with the Eddie Murphy movie, The Nutty Professor, where he says about, hey, you point at the person's foot and says, look at their foot, and everyone laughs. That's the
Yes,
genius, right? Like that to me is bullying. That's not
it
like
is.
getting everyone to empathize with the situation. Oh, we've all been there. We were all late for the flight and we got angry and we did something silly, and
Mhm,
I am as the comic, I'm sort of the stand-in for all of our frustration. We're
mhm,
mutually sharing in this. And so that's not what that was. That was definitely just being a jerk, and he doesn't, as you say, he doesn't even address that. It's
mhm,
just creating this narrative of this diabolical black woman.
mhm.
And I've seen tons of it from a lot of unfortunately, it's a lot of black men online as well, that she's this terrible person who created all this, who sexually humiliated Will Smith and all of that, and it's very frustrating to see.
Yes. And they're mad at you. They're mad at me. How can you defend her? It's sort of like when people, I wear masks all the time. Right now, you can see me, Stephen. I'm in my house, so I'm not wearing a mask. When I go into public, if I go inside a place, particularly if I'm going to be there for a while, like when I saw Chris Rock, I was wearing a mask. Very few other people in my row was, but I was wearing a mask, and I still could have gotten COVID. I didn't, but you never know. But when when you go out and you wear a mask, there are some people who will confront you. Not me, but I have seen it happen where they get mad at you for wearing a mask because it annoys them. You're standing out. They have to tell you you're wrong. They have to get you on their side because if you're wearing a mask, maybe you're saying that they're wrong, or maybe you're saying that they're doing something that's unsafe. So I had that experience in the last week with the Jada Pinkett Smith situation because there are people who are trying to argue with me about her being wrong. And I say, well, I see how she could be wrong, but neither of us know her. We don't know what's happening. All we saw is who got slapped and who slapped the person. And the person in the middle, who neither was the slappy or the slapper, is getting blamed for everything. And so people are like, no, you must understand. So, like years ago, a friend of mine invited me to Harlem to see, and she surprised we went to see Showtime at the Apollo. Went to see the Apollo, and it was amateur night. And there was this band. They were not great. They weren't great. And there were these women in front of me, and I didn't want to boo them because I was like, you know what? They looked nervous as heck. They weren't great. Enough people were booing them. And the woman in front of me goes, you must boo. You must boo. Because me booing made her feel better about booing. If we were all booing, she's not being mean. If this is just part of the culture, it's part of the experience, and we all get to boo these people because that's the rules. And we can boo you. Jada Pinkett Smith has been clowned by this man for 30 years almost, and she understands that when she winds up in public. Now, when she was there at the Oscars, she didn't say a thing. She didn't do the presentation. She just showed up with a pretty bald head and her beautiful dress and sat by her husband. That's what she did. And the fact that he picked her out of a crowd to mess with, not just and to her face, like she's literally sitting in the front row, like he can see her reacting. That was set to hurt. And the fact that this man did an entire documentary about black women's relationship with their hair. So he understands that he's calling her a bald looking so and so, which, you're Southern, that's not cool.
Mhm.
And we have to examine. I'm sitting here with my short hair. I just got my hair cut Thursday. We understand that the European standard of beauty, and that everyone in the world, black, white, whatever, the beauty standard is long hair, and you're having your hair not grow or be nappy or whatever, or be bald is not feminine. That's the whole thing. So he folded all of that into a joke.
Mhm.
And then once again, the You Must Boo contingent, who is bending over backwards to say he was complimenting her because Demi Moore was a badass in G.I. Jane. And literally, I've seen this. And first of all, those of you can't blame me because I've been covering pop culture my whole life. And I remember they made fun of her too. They called Demi Moore Sinead O'Connor, and they called all of them bald headed so and so. So nobody, there were a
Yeah.
lot of people. And
I
the point of G.I. Jane was that her hair was shaved to humiliate her, to make her one of the
Mhm.
guys. And she said, if you're going to do this, I'm going to do this. That's what that moment was about. And Chris Rock knows that.
Also, Jada Pinkett Smith was in a little film called The Last Two Matrixes, so I don't know why, like which I think more people might have seen than G.I. Jane. I saw it because I was alive at the time and in college, but I think anyone under 30 would be like, "What is this referencing of?" It's
Right.
interesting because at the Oscars, Michelle Yeoh and I think others have made sort of again dinged Don Lemon, rightly so, for his line about Nikki Haley being past her prime. And that became
Dude.
this mantra. It's very interesting that no one is sort of like justifying that really tacky line by the fact that, well, Nikki Haley's a powerful woman, former UN ambassador, about to become she's running for president. She won't win, but she's running for
God
president.
forbid.
She's a terrible person in many ways politically,
Yeah.
so she deserves this ding. They get that, no, that is not cool because you're also making a reference. It's a misogynistic reference that smears all women.
Yes. And
Um,
I wrote
it,
about that. I wrote
mhm,
about Nikki Haley and about that. And I said, like I said, she's also a person who wanted to deport a black man because he was running against her preferred opponent. And she wanted to say that there's no racism in America and she's delusional. However, she is a woman who is not only the prime age to run for president on the average. I actually had to do math. They made me do math, Stephen. But she is about 30 years younger than either of the front runners, the current front runners. So, but they're men. So there is nothing when he said it's like 20s, 30s, you can't even be president until you're 35. And she's my
yeah,
age. She's 51 years old. So she is in the average age for people who would be, I think the average age is like 50, something like that, to like on your first inauguration. So she's not even, no, she's like, it's 53. So she's not even at that age yet. She's
yeah,
below the prime number of that average. So what is 20, 30, the prime age to do? Have kids look cute in a bathing suit. Who gives a crap? That's not why you're running. And you couldn't even do it. You couldn't even run for president at your optimal bikini age anyway.
yeah, yeah. So and Don Lemon is rightly getting dragged for this. The Republicans are running ads about it. So in certain ways, the slap might have done Chris Rock a favor because
Oh,
there was
certainly.
certainly no focus on this really distasteful. Congresswoman Presley had talked about, wow, this is really offensive. But that was beyond, as we said, nothing justifies him being slapped,
Nothing.
but the idea that he felt no sense of why this, the sense of sometimes if I pushed something to a point where this was a reaction, it was an unjustified reaction, but man, I feel bad that I did this, was never part of the equation. Instead, it
No.
was just, I'm going to double down and really um, demonize her. And something I've noticed, and I wrote about this for One Cat, was that his contempt for, he talks about, I didn't go whining to Oprah or Gail,
Mm.
and his contempt for Jada and Will, I think specifically, sitting down, having this tough conversation
Mm-hmm.
about the
Mm-hmm.
relationship. He's like, how that was so low down. That's ridiculous. He was appalled by it, even though he was on a stage just a few years ago talking about cheating on his wife, his porn addiction. She wasn't on the stage with him
No.
sharing the mic.
Nope.
And so, what makes, but there's this perhaps toxic masculinity at play, right? The idea of like, if I'm doing some aggressive jokes, that's different from
Mm-hmm.
Will Smith sitting across from his wife in tears, admitting that this hurt him, confronting her about it. And, you know, it's almost playing into Rock's game, I think, to a degree, to go into the wheres and wherefores of that relationship, or whether it was a
Yeah.
correct or whatever. But it was just, what he was basically on was, I'm going to judge their relationship. I'm going to judge these decisions. I'm going to judge even how it's conveyed. He did it later with Meghan Markle, right? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
dare she go and talk about facing racism? And it's just like, are you not going to stand up for any black woman in the world?
No.
Like
No, he's
with
not.
Meghan, like
The
you're,
ones he wants to sleep with, but then again, he still like he reduces Rihanna to her panties. He reduces Doja Cat to wanting to sleep with her. He reduces that ugly bit about um the P word, which he personifies as a woman. The P word needs a new roof. The P word needs a new car. It was like, no, it's a woman. But then again, if you watch the obviously it's inconsistency because uh, Marlon Wayans special, which was recorded before this came out around the same time, but was obviously recorded beforehand. He talks about how back in the 90s, in the early 90s, when Chris Rock had been cast in the part that Marlon Wayans had thought he was going to have in his brother's I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, that Marlon Wayans is 15 and he's hitting on this woman who's like 19 or 20, and at the premiere, and Chris Rock grabs her and moves her and says, "What you gonna do with that blank?" Like, because that's what women are, and maybe that's not how he feels, but that's his presentation. That's the way that he presents women. Like I said, I don't know Chris Rock. I was a fan of his for a very long time. I'm not that okay. All right, people who are gonna write me when this comes out, I don't know this man. I cannot say that he hates black women. I cannot say that in his soul he is the most terrible person in the world. I just know him by his work, and his work is routinely misogynistic, with black women being on the other end of that wit. And I know it because I am one, and I listen to it, and I it's harder to laugh. And no, I know there were people who go because they're trying to. They're basically people want to live in the world where black women are wrong about everything, and we're reacting or just looking for reasons to tell us that we're wrong. So when we say things like, um, well, he made a joke about in Good Hair when he's talking about to the Indian woman about, well, some black women here, they beat you up for your hair. It's like, okay, I guess whatever.
Mm.
Um, that's not funny.
Well, it's sort of what is the focus of the joke? Who's the focus of the
It was the
joke?
focus of the joke is that black women are desperate to have straight hair, and they will go to the source because so much of the hair and the weaves and the pieces comes from India. So they would come here and beat you up. Also, black women are violent, black women are petty, black women are vain. No, yes, you could make that joke about um maybe women of any race stealing minks to make eyelashes, whatever. But that's not what he does. His joke is about hair. His joke is about skin color. His book is about jokes about shade.
Well,
Um,
there never seems to be any grace. So
no.
almost 20 years ago, when he was joking about Janet Jackson at the wardrobe malfunction, he has a whole
He's
act on that,
apologized for that since.
and he's since apologized. But at the time, I go back and I think we all laughed at it at the time, but he rightly apologized because it's all focused on her, and
Yes.
like how dare she even, was very much don't show your
40-year-old blankety blank.
yeah, and
Like it was
doesn't
offensive. It was offensive that a 40-year-old woman would dare be sexualized because how no one wants to see that. I guarantee you there are plenty of people who were interested in seeing Janet Jackson's bosoms, but to him, who was in his 30s, one moment, sorry about this. Ah, I thought I turned that off. Sorry. Um, that he has. I didn't laugh. I mean, I was like 32, I guess, 32, 33 when that came out. And I was not super far from 40. And Janet Jackson, because I'm a little black girl from the United States, I wanted to be Janet Jackson of my life. So how dare you, when the moment is about this thing, whether it was planned or not, this thing that happened that resulted in her and only her having her career ruined, and all that
mhm.
you can do is pile on and talk about her body is unattractive because of her age.
Well, there's the pile on. There's not finding the humanity or and I said it's something that I was a big fan of his work, and you go back, and that is what comes up, that sense of a
Yeah.
lack of empathy, a lack of. So there's the classic black mall routine he has, where he talks about the black mall and the white mall, and if you listen to it, it's funny, but the black mall is loaded with contempt. Look how terrible it is, and crappy the black mall is, and look how awful these things are. And just occurred to me that, the Richard Pryor routine, early Richard Pryor routine, he might talk about growing up in a whorehouse or growing up
Mm.
in poverty, but he will spin it of like, look at all these characters. And I think
Yes.
someone had written, it was almost, he creates these people living in sort of the margin society, almost mythic character. It's like,
Yes.
BT Johnson, who like fights the police, and then there's the wino, the has that conversation. This is a very human conversation, the wino and the junkie and stuff like that. So he creates a sense of there's humanity amongst these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not just gonna open the door and show you who's, I'm not gonna open the door to white audiences and show, black despair for you to laugh at.
Yes.
I'm going to have you sort of wind up empathizing with these
Yes.
people. I gotcha, right? You're racist, but now you're empathizing
Mm-hmm.
with my grandmother, getting the switch for me, all of that. You're there with us. You're seeing us as people.
Yes.
And that was never what kind of rock was often doing, especially when he talks about black women or big black women. It's a lot of targeting them as not truly people.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously not just black women. One of his most famous was OJ, I understand. So his
Oh my
response
God.
to violence. So the idea that, and it just occurs to me because when you're young, it seems like things take forever. But this is literally just 2 years after she was
Yeah.
murdered. So 2 years after he's murdered, he's talking about how she somehow deserves having
Yes.
been almost decapitated by a man who had tortured her throughout their
Yes.
marriage and stalked her because she dared to. And
Leave.
I think there's a thread, right, of sexual humiliation that he focused on. So Rock focuses on how Ron Goldman was driving OJ's car,
Mm-hmm.
not her car, but OJ bought it. Even though they're divorced, even though they had a settlement, it's OJ's car. How dare she let another man drive the car? How dare she let another man come to OJ's house, even though it's her
Her
house for the
house.
settlement? And then to get an audience of people and sort of the call and response tradition, right? Because everything's building up of he dogs her and then goes, not saying he should have killed her, but
But
I
I
understand,
understand. Yeah.
to the point to where the audience is repeating, but I understand, for the murder of a woman whose killer, I can, don't sue me, OJ, whose killer was acquitted just barely a year earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's really shocking when you go back to listen to it as an older person. I'm like, oh my God, I laughed at this. I feel complicit.
Now, I'll tell you, I never laughed at that bit, but I didn't turn it off either
Mhm.
because there were jokes surrounding it that were funny. So I was when people went, oh, but I didn't walk out. I mean, I didn't see it live, but so at a friend's house watching, I didn't say, please turn this off now. Right. We kept watching it. And even though I instantly knew it was a terrible joke and he was blaming this woman for her death and he was, yeah, I think OJ did it, news at 11. It's not that big a deal to think that. And I've always thought that, but I think at the same time, there those of you who weren't there in the 90s may not understand what a truly galvanizing event that was. And the question about, if particularly if you were black, did you believe he did it or not? Or did you believe he
Mhm.
did it? Did you believe that he did it and you were protecting him because he's like, our crazy uncle collectively? And, like Chris Rock said, we're not going to fight in front of white people and we're going to like deal with them ourselves. We're going to, deal with that, same thing with like Tiger Woods or someone like that, where it's like, we're going to deal with them ourselves or we won't deal with them, but we're certainly not going to like join in with white people as they talk about him or mock him. So
That's such a big trigger for a lot of white people, and inevitably I'll encounter a white person like, this is when I lost faith in our justice system. It's like, so
then,
the Scottsboro Boys, or here's a lot of, um, and especially because both with later with Trayvon Martin, and then later with
yes,
the George Zimmerman trial, and then later the with Kyle Rittenhouse, there would be these white lawyers who will come on scene and explain of like, it's so hard to prosecute someone successfully for murder of our system. Won't, it's very hard. And every black person in America is like, really? Like, it's really
is it?
that hard? And
Because we
so when
all
you're
got people in jail, right? We know people. right, who have been in jail. And so we're all like, well, wasn't that hard to put him in jail? He's in jail all the time. I've known people who've been in and out of jail. Not super hard.
Yeah. So with OJ, it was just more of it's this sort of later racist kind of concept that the jury is this bunch of, almost like something from Birth of a Nation, this sort of unfit black people
Yes.
on this jury. Not, it's like, well,
Yes.
maybe it's a predominantly black jury that's did its job, and the prosecution did not. Like, I've only have a degree in law and order, but I would know not to let the guy put put the gloves on. Like, it's the dumbest thing. I think they've done
Jack
lectures on this
McCoy,
later. That is
Jack
the dumbest thing.
McCoy in his like the 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah.
Jack McCoy would have never. He would have objected to that with that righteous furrowed
Yeah.
fuzzy brow of his. He would have been like, "Your Honor," and he would have been mad about it. Love that dude, man. He never would have stood for that. That
You gain nothing from this. It's like, well, yes,
no.
because obviously, Leslie, when I kill someone, I make sure my gloves fit. I have my very well fitting test. It's like, what? This is useless information. Um, and of course, the racist cop. So yeah,
Oh
make
my
so
god.
you're angry. You really want the black jury who's literally probably dealing with racist cops right now. It's
Right
not just
now.
it's not just like he's, because I think a lot of white people do think of the race like, oh, he's like Archie Bunker and he's still a nice guy. It's like, oh, no, no, no. We only
Yeah.
see the racism part where he doesn't, where he beats us up and doesn't, so we don't trust him. So yes, your
But
case
he's a
fell
deacon.
apart.
He's nice to ladies at church. I don't care. You're beating me. You're beating me. So, and I think I read something once with a lawyer about OJ that said that one of the questions is you never want to be in a position where you're asking questions you don't know the answers to.
Absolutely.
So when in that situation, when the glove is a question, right? The glove is, will the glove fit, is a question that the prosecute that it comes up, and the defense is like, well, we're going to have him put on these gloves and the gloves don't fit, you must acquit. He should have never gotten near those gloves. There's no way. Like I said, if I were, once again, Jack McCoy, School of Law and Order, yes, tackle that man. You can send Claire Kincaid over to punch him in the face. I don't know what you do. Something.
You mentioned our girl Claire Kincaid, the my favorite as well.
R.I.P. R.I.P. girl. Jamie Ross. Somebody got to get him because you can't be dealing with this stuff. It never would have happened. It's the kind of thing I can imagine. One of my favorite characters on that show was Lieutenant Van Buren, who's played by Essa Merkerson. And
Ugh.
you could imagine there were sometimes a couple times where she was mad at people, like they would bring her in on the stand, and Jack McCoy would say something like that implied that she and her cops had done something that was incompetent, and she would glare at him for the rest of the episode. It's like, yes. So all that to say that that thing was sloppy, and I think that a lot of people thought, well, he deserved to go free because the prosecution, in the OJ sense, could not prosecute. They couldn't convict a guilty man.
Yeah, I feel like in my Johnny Cochran, because I'm a big fan of the movie Reversal of Fortune, and it occurred to me how,
Mm.
Klaus Van Bulow, who many believe is a guilty man,
Oh, I
the
do.
way that Alan Dershowitz was sort of romanticized as like how he expertly won this case, whereas Johnny Cochran is like, well, he actually, that was a tremendous legal victory, right? But instead, sort of the narrative that emerged was he was this hack lawyer who
Mm.
took advantage of this gullible jury and played the race card. And I felt like did not give perhaps Cochran credit
No.
for doing his job. And yes, it's terrible that a guilty man walks, but perhaps don't have racist cops. Maybe like don't.
Right?
That's some of the stuff you could fix.
Quite easily. Don't have racist cops. Don't have a guy who's freelancing and screwing with a murder weapon. What are we doing? What are we doing? And that you can't, and that, and Cato and Judge Ito and just all this stuff. And you're just like, this is crazy pants. It's literal crazy pants where you're just looking at it going, and then the one guy who seemed like an okay person turned out to be Robert Kardashian, and the sins of that family. Good God, would he literally put into play in terms of how that family has had a stranglehold on pop culture and the body image of black women and the vulturistic thing. Don't get me started. You got me started, but I'm going to stop. Um, I think that everything that came from that trial was nuts. And for Chris Rock, as you said, I guess if you guys weren't in the 90s, like, how old are you, Steven?
I am 48.
Okay, so I'm a little older than you. I'm 51. I'll be 52 next month. So if you were conscious in that time, you understood that there was like a before OJ and after OJ, and that race relations really, everyone tried to pretend they were better, but that just showed how close to the surface all of this stuff was, and all of these understandings that I knew white people and black people who, well, you, what black white people were like, well, you think he's guilty, right? And the white black person would go, no, or they would go, well, I'm not going to talk about it with you. And so if you don't understand, I mean, we're coming up on, the 30th anniversary of that next year, of that murder
Hmm.
in 1994, and the trial was in 1995. I think that that's such a big thing, and I think that if those people, I mean, nobody got murdered on the Oscars. Nobody got, he didn't even look like it left a mark, which is not to say you should never slap somebody. It was not okay. It was absolutely 100% not okay. I think that part of the frustration that people have had with me, with other people, is that I refuse to say this is all this person's fault, or this is all this person's fault. It is more complicated. It's
Yo,
always more
when
nuanced.
it's complicated and nuanced, oh, Leslie, you can't have that online.
No.
And
Just tell me who's wrong. Just when I hate somebody today, just
um,
tell me who to point me towards the wrong person so I can tell them they're terrible.
and to sort of actually link it all together was with I think with OJ, and then later with
Mm-mm.
Michael Jackson, Janet Jackson,
Uh,
and then now even Will Smith. There's often a sort of what do you call the sort of conditional whiteness that black celebrities can enjoy, and that gets revoked quickly, right? You f up once,
and
and
it's
so I think what
over.
happens is sort of, and Will Smith, I think it was a very interesting when this occurred. You had a lot of, it'd be more writers like yourself or myself would look at
Mhm.
it like, oh man, someone we felt some sort of perhaps a kinship toward
Yes.
had effed up. Why'd you do this, man? Why'd you do it? Whereas you get like sort of from the Amy Schumer contingent or white writers of just like, he's
Oh my
done. He's the worst thing ever. He is now every horrible racist.
yes.
He's actually secretly beating Jada. Like I saw that from some a white feminist writer was
Oh yeah,
that he
obviously
was
he's hitting
actually
her.
he's hitting her because that's what men who beat their wives do. They get upset when men insult their wives, which is perhaps true, but you just suddenly dump you just you he was summertime, you were getting jiggy with it. I have photos of you at your
Mhm.
wedding dancing
Right.
to that, and suddenly he's done. He crossed that line.
Judd Apatow, who will not hear this or see this on Twitter because he's blocked me a long time ago. Um, it's a long story, but I think it's because I said something about Lena Dunham being terrible, and she's not blocked me. She might now, but he did. He blocked me years ago. I was like trying to find something that he'd said, and I couldn't get it. And it was like, he has blocked you. I'm like, well, 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 and I'm nobody. But hit Judd Apatow like he could have killed him. No, he couldn't. If he wanted to kill that man, he would have. Because as we all pointed out, he's big black man. If he
Well,
really wanted to do damage to Chris Rock, damage would have been done.
he
And
slapped him, which itself, upon again amongst a certain community will know understand this, itself was the insult. It
the
was like,
insult.
I didn't put all my force into it because you ain't worth it.
Mm-mm.
Like this is the, and I will not use the term that's often described, but this is the slap. It's just a slap, right? Not I'm black, but ever like I think Judd Apatow had the idea that he was apparently spontaneously combust, or he would somehow could have fallen and he could have been
And hit his head.
manslaughter. He could
Oh,
have been murdered. And it's like, look, no, there's someone you probably you're gonna have Mel Gibson in your film later. You're gonna have like every white dude gets a second chance. There's a
all
you
of
know,
them.
Brad Pitt, like Angelina Jolie. How many times does she have to say that Brad Pitt got drunk and almost like beat up her kids in front of her? Like
And the
literally, that's what
kids
she's.
have things to say. The kids are always like, "Yeah, we can't stand him."
Everyone's like, we
Whatever.
love this. But these celebrities are still like, we love this guy. He's swell. And so, I felt like there is this sort of conditional aspect to it of whiteness that he kind of lost, whether he will gain that back. And it's
I'm
Chris
sure he
Rock.
will. I'm sure he will. Not anytime soon. And I think that once again, Marlon Wayans special where he talked about that. I mean, he was not completely. He had that whole joke about Will Smith talking about parents on the street. He's like, parents? What do you mean parents? You had two? Yeah, it's the stereotypes. And the Wayans, they all had parents. There were 87
Mhm.
of those children. So, but he's joking in stereotypes, and I know that that's part of that style of comedy, and I get it. It is what it is. But that Will Smith was conferred a white adjacent persona by people who, I mean, when he said they didn't even know he was black, that's not true. They always understood he was black. He was just a black that they could manage. There was no surprise. But yeah, he sure became an N-word to them real fast. He sure became suddenly that I forget what I was looking today about it. Some woman who's a writer who said, "What if he had slapped Betty White?" It's like, first of all, Betty White is dead. She is literally dead
Oh my God,
at
Leslie,
this moment.
that
Did you see
I
that?
saw. No, I saw that, and I swear I only just finished laughing. Like shortly before we started talking, was I able to compose myself after reading that originally
What
almost a
if
year
he
ago? What if
and
it had
she was
been Betty?
serious?
What
And
if
first
there
of
were
all,
all these different scenarios? So yes, what if Betty White had come out and insulted, because that was totally her style of humor. We love Betty White, so it's sort of like here's this beloved old woman
yeah,
who isn't. She's beloved precisely because she doesn't make crass jokes
no.
at the expense of other people.
Every
Like that,
once in a while, she called someone she knew were broad, and they laughed. Oh, how they laughed, Stephen! They laughed so much, chuckling. Um, but
she was very upfront. There was an interview with her about her punching up type of humor. So people would
yes,
be like, "Oh, she's like, I have no problem saying the," because they could get an easy laugh if she comes in and curse, right? Because she's Betty White. She's like,
yes,
why do I give a fuck, right? Literally, sure, I'll do that. But then it'd be like, say something mean. I was like, well, that's mean. I won't do that.
I'm not going
I
to do that.
will. And I will punch up. I'll act like I'm being mean to Ryan Reynolds, which is one of the
Yes,
things that broke out because that looks ridiculous. I'm playing on my image. It is more me, and he's
I'm calling
bigger,
Sandra
stronger.
Bullock a slut, whatever. And these are her friends. These are her
Yes.
friends. These are people she was in a movie with. And so just the ridiculous of that statement. It's like, first of all, Betty White is dead, was dead at that moment, not alive. So
Yeah.
it would have
She
been
would have
weird
been
for
deader.
it would have been weird for him to hit Betty White. It's like, well, that's odd. But even if he had, it's like, did Betty call his wife out her name? Did Betty say something? It's like there's no
So
world. There's no
it's
world in which he hits Betty White. So I read something today that said, "What if a thing that didn't happen happened completely differently? What would that be like?" Which exactly, it's like once
my
Will Smith
God.
opened the door. Also, I think that if you have humor like an Amy Schumer or a Judd Apatow or a person where it's crass and it's cringy and it's there to make you uncomfortable and to say things about um, body shape and race and gender and whatever it is in a way that is supposedly making fun of that person and the persona that they have created, but really is punching down. To like, Amy Schumer's joke about I used to date Hispanic guys, but now I prefer consensual. Ha ha ha! Funny. Hispanic men are rapists. That's so funny. And she's like, that was just a joke. But it's like you don't get to make that joke. You're
Mhm.
punching down at people who already have this. So you going, oh, Sarah Silverman, going, oh, look at me, wearing blackface. And she's admitted it took her a long time. Her ego would not let her admit that she was not allowed to say that just because she was an enlightened white person. She didn't get to do that. And it took
Mhm.
her a while. It's like, do you remember this? Probably 10 years ago, Ani DeFranco do you know about this? She was
Mhm.
planning a writer's retreat at a facility that turned out to have been a plantation in Louisiana. It was a
Mhm.
former plantation. And so she was having her Righteous Babe writer's retreat with a bunch of writers, including a couple of people who were African American, and at least one writer I think their name was Taji. Anyway, people realized what it was. So you had people say, "You can't have this here. We didn't know what it was." And she said, Ani said, who has gone out of her way to be a non-problematic, righteously, socially aware, striking against racism and she's a feminist and all of these things. She's on the right of good side of good. So when she says, "Well, I didn't know it was booked through my production company, not me, and they're going to do something about it," and so there were people like on Jezebel who were going, "Oh, this is terrible. You have to cancel it." And there are people going, "No, Ani would never do anything bad. You're the problem. You're the racist. You're whatever." So she cancels it. And the first time she cancels, the first letter is, "Well, we can't go to that place anymore." And she basically said she was being attacked. And she accused people of she was being attacked by, quote, "high velocity bitterness"
Hmm.
for a situation that she and her people created. So then she came back. And to her credit, and I have been a fan, wrestled with this, but when she came back and said, "It took me a while to admit that I was wrong," because who wants to be wrong about something like that? Who wants to admit they have a blind spot about something like that? And I truly apologize now because I've come to understand that my defensiveness made it impossible for me to see or admit the wrong that I had done. And I respected that. But it shouldn't have gotten
Hmm.
that far. It should never have gotten that far in 2012 or whatever it was to.
That you're at a plantation. Um,
Mm.
with the time we have left, I also a couple of questions I have for you. So you're a Baltimore resident, and this was a big because Chris Rock had chosen to essentially have it in Baltimore, where Jada Pinkett Smith is from, not in Philly. Well, where
Or
Will
Will is
Smith was
from
born and raised, on the playground, what's where he spent most of his
most of
days.
his days. Yeah, still
Uh,
in Max and relaxing. What? How do you know this about him, Stephen? This is remarkable. It's
yeah,
remarkable.
it just
Yes.
stuck in my head somehow. But it's such a weird stalkerish thing to do. Again, for a woman who did not hit him, like I'm
Who
this
did
whole
not hit
time,
him?
she has not done anything to you other than apparently asked you to participate, to not cross a sort of racial picket line when she was organizing the boycott of the
Yes. Because
Oscars, and they had no black nominees. Um, but yeah,
and,
he like tends to have this issue with her.
yeah, and there's no evidence that she directly said to him, "Don't do this job because my husband didn't get nominated." But he said that as point of fact. And she says, and people surround her going, "No, that's not what happened." She suggested that no black people, that everybody boycott. But it wasn't, she never mentioned Will in her statements. It was that no one had been nominated who was black. And so for him, once again, if he can make it about her, then you must boo. If he can make
Hmm.
it her fault, then you must boo. And I mean, I had a conversation with a mentor of mine who had, because we're all from Baltimore, who had met her, who was like, "Well, she wasn't very nice." I'm like, "So you get to call her a B word? That's okay." And he's like, and he could not, he kept trying to reconcile his personal feelings and, "Oh, it's free speech." Yes, it's free speech, but free speech has consequences. There is no consequence. There's no speech without consequence. So Chris Rock is absolutely, positively, legally available to say these things. But I am legally responsible. People are like, "Who are you to talk?" I'm like, "It says critic and look, it's pop culture. Oh, well,
Yeah.
whatever. It is what it is." And so people are going to do what they're going to do. And they just want you to shut up about it so they can feel good about hating somebody else.
And so you're the author of this book, Black Widow. Before we like, can you tell us a bit about the book, where people can find it, and the time we have left? Because
Yes, it's called Black Widow: A Sad, Funny Journey Through Grief for People. Oh, look, Stephen, it is behind me. What? This is my Jake Tapper setup. I was like, "Oh, look," and it's a book. Um, Sad, Funny Journey Through Grief for people who normally avoid books with words like journey in the title. It was a memoir of the first year of my widowhood. I was widowed almost 8 years now in 2015. My husband was 44. I was almost 45. I was 44. And I write about experiencing grief and being a widow and, raising a kid and finalizing the adoption of the child that we were caring for, and living with my mother, and figuring out I'm never going to date again, and all of these other weird things that were going on in my life through the messiness of it, not the hey, this is how I've healed and now I've looked back and namaste and now you can too. It's like I was writing it in real time. I was writing it in the middle of it as it was happening, like I was journaling it basically. My grief journal was a book that I got paid for. So that was nice. You can do that. So basically that's what the book is. And I think that, it came out a week before lockdown. It came a week ago, a year ago, I'm sorry, 3 years ago on Friday, on March 10th. So it came and everything got canceled. It's like, hey, here's your book. Here's this big party. I mean, they threw a party for me in Palm Beach, and James Patterson was my interviewer. It was a whole thing. And then I was going to be on the Today Show. I had flights booked. I had all these things. I was going to New Orleans to do a book signing, and then in a week I watched everything get
Oh my
canceled.
God, I'm so sorry. Obviously about your late husband, but
Yes,
there's such a to it's sort of a double grief, because that was sort of the
dude.
pandemic was definitely a sort of a period of mourning or grief, and it's sort of a
Oh,
very twisted irony of that, right? Like you
it
have this really
was
an idea to go forward with this, and to have that kind of
to
taken away.
happen. But the good thing is that nothing good about a pandemic, but the good thing about it is that many more people um, were able to relate. Not that I want them to relate to it, but I think that I released it as I wrote something last week into a world that was grieving. It changed very quickly, and there's a group of authors um, that got together whose books all came out in that first several months of the pandemic, who lockdown literature we called ourselves, and we supported each other and organized online readings and support each other's books. And when things opened up, I've done readings with some of them live, and different panels and stuff, and it's been really a beautiful way of coping. Writers will figure things out, so that's been an unexpected good consequence of this thing that happened. And also because every day, unfortunately, people become widowed, and I get at least once a week someone reaching out to me saying, I read your book, or I'm not ready to read your book, or I gave your book to my sister or my mom or my friend at work. And that's why I wrote it, so I'm happy for that.
This is wonderful. And, thank you so much, Leslie, for coming on and walking us through this weirdness as we embrace. And your voice is such a great one. And I
Oh,
really
thank you.
value your work and enjoy reading your work. And Leslie's at the Baltimore Banner. Read her work online. And thank you again for joining us. And
Thank
we
you.
will like, share, subscribe. This will be on my YouTube channel, The Play Typer Guy, and this will also be on the podcast in a couple weeks, The Play Typer Guy, so you can listen while driving. You shouldn't watch this while driving, but
Don't.
so
That's bad. Bad.
thank, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.